Right, morning guys. Today we're looking at contrast and specifically how you can control this in Lightroom. Now, first of all, it's important to understand what contrast is. Contrast is a thing that if you mess it up, it makes your images look shitty online. Unfortunately, that's the truth because a lot of people take contrast and they think it's a beautiful way to punch the image. They take it way too high and you get those, how do we say, those hard-looking images that are just not cool. So you need to understand what contrast is. Basically, it's the difference between the lights and the darks in your image. How dark are the darks, how light are the light. By increasing contrast, you make the darks darker and the lights lighter, which means your tonal range moves further apart. If you decrease contrast, your darks get lighter and your lights get darker. Say that 3 times fast. But it makes more for a washed out image. Now, I'm going to have a quick look in Lightroom how you can use the contrast slider as well as the black and white slider, even though it's not exactly the same thing, to affect contrast in an image. Also important, this video needs to be watched and read with the blog that it's associated to, otherwise it's not going to make all that much sense. So if you're on YouTube, check at the bottom of this, find the link, head on over to the blog and watch the video from there and it'll hopefully make sense from that side. So, a couple of things, let me take you into Lightroom here. I'm going to use these 2 images on screen now to play around with contrast, just to show you what it does and how you can affect it using Lightroom. Let's go on this one first, D for develop module, right. So this is my raw file as shot. You can see down on the right hand side here, everything's flat. So contrast, easy. The contrast slider, as in Lightroom, everything you take the slider to the right, it increases, left, it decreases. What's important here? If you've looked at the blog, you would have seen, I've shown you 2 histograms, one narrow one and one fat one. Narrow histogram equals low contrast. There's not much spread of tones. On a fat histogram or one that's a bit more broad, there's more tonal ranges, which means higher contrast. So if I look at this histogram at the top right of the screen here, you'll see the contrast is okay. There's a pretty wide spread of there. If we then, and this, remember the Lightroom histogram is live, it changes as you change the slider. So as I'm going to change contrast now, watch what happens. First of all, ignore the picture, look what happens to my histogram. If I increase it, see how it gets broader across the range, and if I decrease it, how it gets narrower. Right, so just by having a quick glimpse at a histogram, you can see narrow histogram, not much contrast, wider histogram, more contrast throughout the tonal ranges. Now, let's move our attention back to this image here. Watch what happens. I'm going to slowly clock contrast forward and back. If we take it right, increases. Watch the dark areas, especially the vehicle itself. That's our wildlife vehicle in the Mora. Watch how dark it gets. Right, so it gets darker as we go over. Also notice, I'm up at 74 now, how bright the cheetah looks suddenly. If I drop contrast all the way down, see how they kind of look washed out. So, increases the darks and the lights, decreases the darks and the light. So by playing up and down on contrast, you can affect it, it gives it punch, right? Some people also say that it kind of makes it feel like it's coming out of the screen, it disconnects it from the background. Focus on the cheetah, let's do this, get you nice and close. If we do it, that's increase, maybe stands out, decrease does look a bit more washed out. Right, so that's the one option that you have, is to play contrast up and down. Now, coming down, and in Lightroom 4, this is a beautiful thing, you've got blacks and whites, the 2 sliders. That is for you to control the black point or white point in an image. If you're not sure what that is, leave me a comment and we can pick up on that in a later stage. Blacks, watch what I'm holding. I'm going to zoom in on here. If I hold my cursor on blacks, you'll see that on my histogram, that little area gets highlighted in the very left-hand side of my histogram. That shows me that's the area I'm going to affect. The same with white. So if I lift it up, the part on the right-hand side gets highlighted. So remember now the theory of narrow and broad histogram and how it relates to contrast. If I take my blacks down, I move it across, and I take my whites to the opposite side, it has the same effect. You can see now, watch what happens to the histogram if I take it back to normal. That's my normal histogram. If I increase blacks, increase whites, it stretches it out. Yes? So it's not true contrast, but you can create the same idea. So as a quick exercise, let's try this. Let's zero that, go back here. To create a virtual copy, right click, virtual copy, you've got 2 of these now. First one, take that to develop module, we just increase contrast. Let's be weird, let's decrease it, right? So decrease it to this, so it's a nice washed out, better example. If I click onto my next image, this is the original, my second version. If I'm going to decrease my blacks and decrease my whites. Yes? Let's go all the way. And now we go back here and put them together. Right. You can see both of them are a little bit more washed out than they started at. But contrast, the one on the left, this is my contrast adjustment, still is more powerful. Remember, we're washing it out now. Let's, for argument's sake, do it the other way. So let's increase contrast now to a bit. That's what some people do. It's not nice. Don't go too far. If you're not sure, pull back. Let's take this one now, which is the one where we work on black and whites. Let's take whites up and blacks up. So that now also, that's increased. Let's go back to grid. Let's put them together for you. No, that's not together. Stand by, I can do this. In. Right, so again, the one on the left-hand side is my contrast adjustment. The one on the right-hand side is where I use the black and white. You can see now again, contrast will give you a better balance and more punch on both the whites and the darks. You can get the same effect with black and white sliders, but not as powerful. So, nice thing is, however, you can set your black and white point first and then play with contrast, which is probably going to be your best bet to get a nice, natural, punchy image all the way through. Okay, so contrast in black and white. Another thing to keep in mind when you're working on contrast, let's go to this one, lines and grass. Again, this is the raw file. Watch what happens to the color of this image when I'm only adjusting my contrast. Check this out. Contrast up, look at what those green, okay, it jumps quite a bit. If I take it down, it affects the color values of the image. So remember, if you're going to adjust contrast, make sure to double check your color tones and play with saturation. So on this one, if I had to take contrast up there, so my before and after, it punches more, but the greens could become a bit much. I might have to touch them back on saturation. You could go with independent color channels as well. But remember, contrast will affect saturation levels in an image as well. Make a note of that. Anyway, so keep reading on the blog now, and we will finish this whole discussion on contrast on that side. My name is Jerry. This is Photo Chat for Wild Eye. I will see you next time.